After finishing 6th in the Belgian Grand Prix, George Russell recalled an infamous statement from the 2022 Formula 1 season, referring to the bouncing that he claimed placed his Mercedes on a knife edge in qualifying and made his Spa weekend difficult. Have Mercedes overdeveloped their car to the point that porpoising returned? "We suffered with a huge amount of bouncing today," said Russell. "A number of teams did, maybe not as severe as we did." Still, obviously a bit of a shame to see that as a sport at the pinnacle of motorsport, the majority of teams are still struggling with bouncing. I hope something can be solved in that regard in the future. Russell's teammate Lewis Hamilton said after the race it was happening to him as well, claiming it was like last year and everywhere. But was it really that bad? And how is it possible that it happens right after Mercedes introduce a big upgrade? Could this be connected? Mike Elliott, Mercedes' chief technical officer, doesn't think so and said that the issue was setup or circuit specific rather than a fundamental one. "We definitely had an amount of bouncing this weekend. Both drivers were telling us that, and we could see it in the data," Elliott explained. "It definitely affects the performance of the cars because it affects the driver's ability to extract the maximum grip from the car. It affects their balance, and it affects their ability to get their braking points right. So that is something we'll be working on for the future." The question we need to ask ourselves is, how much of it is just the circuit we're at in Spa, and how much is to be found in setup, because obviously it was a wet race weekend. A weekend where we had no dry running up until the point we were actually racing. We'll also take a really good look at the upgrade kit and make sure that we're not introducing bouncing with that, but at the moment our belief is it's probably a result of setup or the circuit itself. Russell is correct in stating that these issues have not been resolved. Any onboard video from this year with fast drivers will show proof of the car bouncing. It's not as intense as last year, but it's something that will never go away if F1 has true ground effect flooring. Furthermore, there's a cautionary note here about being careful what you wish for, since one of the many reasons Red Bull stole a march on everyone this year was how well it reacted to rule changes. Russell is understandably disturbed by the bouncing he experienced, and he is correct to be so. However, the solution to this dilemma rests not with the laws, but with Mercedes itself, which is yet to fully grasp these regulations and optimize the car's performance within the inherent limits that such ground effect cars impose. But the W14 is a car that frequently necessitates a lot of analysis of data coming off the circuit, and then cross-referencing it with that of the simulator, which Mick Schumacher frequently finds himself working on Friday night to identify answers that can be utilized in advance of FP3. In Spa, this was not possible. As in every race, we arrive at the weekend after a lot of work on the simulator. The work we do allows us to choose the level of downforce we want on the car for that track, but also the general mechanical and aerodynamic balance in order to hit the ideal window of use, explained Mike Elliott. The simulator, however, does not always discover a single operating base, and in Belgium, the two riders of the previous World Championship team took two distinct setups. The drivers did this simulator work ahead of the weekend, and George felt that a heavier wing gave him more setup options and preferred that kind of balance for his car. Normally, what happens is that during free practice, the riders converge on the same solutions, but obviously it rained at Spa, so we weren't able to test in the dry. The absence of the standard race format prohibited Mercedes from executing the classic work plan, which also affected the W14's race setup, with a balance that was not perfect but hard to rectify. Usually we have good tyre degradation, and we do better in the race. The problem was just that we simply didn't have the right balance. This is a result of not having had the chance to ride in the dry, and not being able to work well with the setup. And so we went to the race with a car that was not very balanced, like our rivals, and we had more degradation. In reality, the W14 seemed more competitive over a single lap than it did during the race. One of the crucial moments for Mercedes in Belgium was Q3 of the sprint shootout, when Lewis Hamilton and George Russell went wheel to wheel on the final attempt, missing out on the opportunity to produce an excellent lap and enhance their starting position. George locked up at turn 1 but finished his lap, causing Lewis Hamilton, who was right behind him, to temporarily raise his foot and abandon his lap on the Kemmel Straight. When there are variable track conditions, which dry out, what you want is to do the best lap at the end of the session. So it's a question of going out on the track and setting useful lap times, but above all, making sure to cross the finish line at the last possible moment with the tyres in the right window of use. Mike Elliott attempted to explain what occurred in the Mercedes pits, claiming that the primary issue was in-team driver communication rather than between Russell and Hamilton. There were a lot of cars in the last corner trying to give each other space, and we had to cross the finish line before the session was over. We therefore asked the drivers to speed up the pace, but in the end we found the two cars too close. This has also happened to other machines. We weren't the only ones to have problems of this type. This unfortunately meant that we couldn't do the lap we wanted and get a better result in the sprint qualifying. We'll analyze what happened with videos and sparse communications, and we'll learn new things to improve. Indeed, the W14 made little progress in the sprint and on Sunday, and an unexpected comeback of porpoising jeopardized Hamilton and Russell's weekend. Going back to jumping on the straights, but especially in high-speed corners, after a year and a half of effort and the conviction that the problem had been handled, is not a promising indication. Mercedes, on the other hand, appears to have very clear thoughts, and the next races in Holland and Monza will deliver the answers they want. Mike Elliott verifies what was originally suspected. The reintroduction of porpoising is due to a bad configuration, in which it was not feasible to develop them throughout the test sessions, as would typically happen, rather than to the modifications on the W14. The side pods were the focal point of these modifications, which built on the conceptual move made at the Monaco Grand Prix, when it chose to forsake the zero-pod idea utilised since the start of the current ground effect era. Mercedes had gone to a larger, downwash ramp-style approach, similar to its competitors, but it looks that it cannot be as aggressive with the bodywork shape as it would want, leaving just a shaky solution. This is due to the team's need to be sensitive to the location of its top SIS, or side impact structure, and the fairing that surrounds it. Mercedes is unable to change this aspect of the car since it would necessitate the homologation of a new chassis, which is not possible during the season owing to the cost restriction. Mercedes, like Red Bull, classified the bigger sidepod inlet, utilized last weekend, as a reliability modification, rather than simply aerodynamic. This indicates that both the interior ductwork and the exterior bodywork have been worked on. The intake design is also modified, with a more cylindrical scoop preferred over the boxy style utilized since its modification in Monaco. This has ramifications for its cooling capacity, as well as a changed undercut arrangement to provide a better flow regime downstream. Changes to the rear of the sidepod bodywork are also being made to take advantage of this, with significantly more concavity along the flank of the ramped portion to assist drive flow laterally over the rear tyre. The ramp segment is likewise more abrupt than previously, with the bodywork lowering to meet the floor and better engage the flow over and through the sidepod's gully-like top surface. The camber of the engine cover has also been adjusted to work in combination with the alterations to the rear part of the sidepod. Regarding upgrades functioning in tandem, Mercedes has made some adjustments to the W14's floor, indicating in its car presentation document that it has changed the volume distribution of the underfloor. According to the researchers, this should assist in extracting more local load from the forward floor vortex system, improving flow to the diffuser. So now it's Mercedes' job to further investigate these upgrades and find out what's working and what's not. The summer vacation is frequently mentioned as a chance for certain teams to review data, proceed with developments, and so on. Nonetheless, the legislation is unambiguous, and the firms must close for 14 days in a row. Mike Elliott, on the other hand, explains how this period of inactivity may be used to advantage and announces the goals for the second half of the season. During the break, you can't do much. It's not allowed by the rules. We have to take 2 weeks off without the possibility of developing, but I think this is a useful break for everyone. It will help to have more energy for the second part of the season, where there will be a need to bring upgrades. We have to keep pushing because we still have a lot to learn from this car in order to get new information in view of the winter and the development of next year's car. So were Mercedes held back by their upgrades? Did this introduce porpoising again, or was it just a case of mistaken setup on both cars? What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to let us know your expectations for the first races after the summer break.